Good morning. Welcome to Member Focus Monday. I'm Christina Schaefer, Social Media Director for HAR, and I am joined this morning by Jeff Hayes. Welcome, Jeff.
Good morning, Christina.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Jeff is a state-certified residential real estate appraiser, and I know that some of our members have some bad blood right now with appraisers, so we promised Jeff we'd be really nice to him this morning. He said that other appraisers have wished him luck for being on this program, so we plan to be very nice to you this morning, Jeff. And if you have questions for Jeff, you can type them into the comments. But before we get to any of those questions, I know a lot of our members know who you are because you're very involved with HAR, but if you could just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. And I am Jeff Hayes. I'm a state certified residential real estate appraiser. I'm also a licensed Texas real estate broker, designated also by the American Society of Appraisers as far as real estate appraisal. And I have been handling appraisal assignments for decades, believe it or not, all the way since I was in high school. And so I think we're to focus this morning probably on the residential appraisals that are involved for the transactions and the sales and the mortgage lending and that so forth. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on everything else. And so I am out there every day. I've seen a lot of changes in the industry in the last few years, and maybe we can touch on some of what's going on.
Very good. Thank you. And you have been involved with HAR for quite some time. You're on the MLS advisory group, actually, and you bring a lot of great insight to that group. How long have you been a part of that group?
I don't know the exact year. I do remember probably about 25 years ago when Bob Hale had us in a meeting and he said, how many people are using the internet? Everybody kind of looked around, and then Bob said, well, how many people have heard of it? And at that point, we learned of HAR's commitment to being on the leading edge of the information and the data. And from a real estate appraiser standpoint, it's invaluable, particularly in Texas, where it's not a full disclosure state. So sometimes we have term limits, sometimes I come and go, but I'm on there right now, and it's just so helpful and interesting and be able to add things to the matrix system that we're working with now. So yeah, appreciate that.
Great, thank you. And I do see a couple people said they're having a bit of a hard time hearing you there, Jeff. So I know
My microphone, is that better?
Yeah, there we go. That sounds much better. So let's get right into it. So what are some of the reasons that you're seeing homes not appraise in our current market?
Well, of course, the not appraised, I assume to mean that the value opinion is less than the contract price. And of course, that has big impact on the transaction from a standpoint of the financing. If people are financing the property, the lender's going to loan the less of either the contract price or the appraised value. And so that becomes the big issue. And there also is a new addendum in the TREC produced a year or two ago, which said that if the appraisal doesn't come in, the buyer can back out of the deal and get the earnest money back. And so, of course, that adds to the impact of the appraisal. I think as prices move up, it's less established what the market value is. And it may be a good point to emphasize that the appraiser's value opinion is really of the market value of the property. And value is worth, and it's in the eye of the beholder. And so I've got what I think things are worth. I've got other people think, what the tax people think, what the lender thinks, all that. But my charge is to develop a value opinion of the market value of the property. And the market value has a definition, which is generally willing buyer, willing seller, nobody being under duress, normal transaction, and then what the property would probably sell for. Years ago, the definition was the highest price that a property would sell for, and that pretty much went away after the savings and loan crisis caused billions of dollars in losses because of this best case type definition. So we're really dealing with probability. And as a price gets above what has historically been the price point, then the appraiser has to consider, is this probable that this would happen? And I contend that it is probable in the right market conditions, and the appraiser hopefully has got the skills and the ability to understand that. I think that people may not be aware of the levels of that the appraisal goes through after the appraiser sends in the appraisal report. This is just a typical scenario.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing that happens is the PDF file is converted into an XML file or computer code. And so the data is data mined out of the appraisal report by somebody like CoreLogic, and they keep that. And then the appraisal report goes into the computer algorithms, and it rates the credit of the reliability of the appraisal based on all their second guessing of the other data that's out there, the other factors, and so forth. Once it gets through that process, which it may come back to the appraiser and ask for more stuff, then it goes to probably a human reviewer. So it goes through a review process there, where there may be people second guessing everything's going up and what's going on. And then after the review and the computer are happy, then it's going to end up with an underwriter who may be sitting 2,000 miles away somewhere and looking at what's in the report. And a lot of this is, the goal is to have a credible value opinion, and that has to be well supported. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to go in too much length on this, but as a result of the financial crisis, there was enormous amount of litigation between basically the government and the big banks. And they figured out pretty early, the plaintiffs figured out that if they could demonstrate that the appraisal in a mortgage was defective, then that meant that the lender had created fraud. And so all these subprime loans and all these mortgage-backed securities with different tranches of mortgages, they were saying 80% of the appraisals done in 2005, 6, 7 were defective. And so they ended up settling for billions of dollars. Some of these were $20 billion settlements and so forth. And so that started changing how they looked at the appraisal, and they're really, a lot of the lenders are more concerned about litigation risk than they are market risk. The other factor that came out of that was that the buyers of mortgage, like Fannie Mae, buy 50% of them. There's a lot of securitization of mortgages that goes on with some of the big banks and others. They have pretty much written it in there now that if a lender, a mortgage broker, a mortgage company, a bank sells their mortgage and it's found to have a defective appraisal, they have to buy it back. Mm-hmm. And so nobody wants to be in that situation. And that comes back around to, if you've got a price that is above what's been established before, unless an appraiser has information to make sense out of that, then if they just you throw out a number there that makes things work, it may not survive all that other process.
That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. I see a lot of questions already coming in for you, and I promise we'll get to all of those questions. Some of them I actually had already planned to ask Jeff. So if you have questions, type them in, and we'll try to get to those.
Well, it's interesting because I'm the only one asking all the questions.
So a common question that I got from a few of our members is, how do most appraisers prioritize their orders?
The appraiser operates from a sole practitioner or a boutique type firm to large firms. With the creation of the middle operation, the appraisal management companies, it's quite possible for an individual appraiser to work get all the work they possibly need with no human contact with anybody, just by doing work for the appraisal management companies. And we probably get a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen requests for appraisals a week from people we don't even know or people we don't want to do work for. So because they don't pay enough or they're not nice or something like that. So the appraiser really ought to, if they're in the service business and they're a professional, they need to meet their deadlines. Mm-hmm. Where it's really prioritized is with the user of the appraisal or the client, the mortgage company, the bank. And they have right now more than half of their work is refinancing. So they're trying to take care of those people, and then they're trying to get the transactions done in a timely manner. And so those are the people that really decide what the priority is that the appraiser tries to meet their commitment for.
Okay.
And so, and it could be a matter of logistics and things like that. If you're going to go this way and there's something else out there, you might try and catch that at the same time. Just normal stuff.
Yeah. So why is it that some people are seeing appraisals take so long right now?
One reason is that the emphasis on fee has created a situation where they may pay, maybe they're offering $500 to an appraisal. Well, the appraisal management company may skim the first couple hundred of that, so you're left with 300. Or even if not, to send it through an appraisal portal might be $15, $20, $30, $40 more than FedEx used to be. And so the delays oftentimes come from the lender. One, they've got to find somebody to take the assignment that is geographically competent, that is credible what they do, that's going to make it through all their underwriting and so forth. And it's not unusual for us to get an engagement letter from a lender that the date says March 18th as far as order date, and we receive it on April the 2nd because it took them 2 weeks to find somebody to take the assignment. And after that, if you get into a complex property and you need to take the time to demonstrate why the property is selling for more than list price, that takes time sometimes. You may need to call people, you may call your peers, and you will try and figure out what's going on. And so there's this conflict between fast and thorough.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense. So what would you say is kind of the average wait time that you're seeing in the Houston area right now?
I would have to rely on the lenders to give you that number. Most of the people I know, they're probably quoting maybe 5 to 7 calendar days, maybe 10 days to 2 weeks. A lot of that depends upon the complexity of the property and so forth.
Right.
And then, of course, the agent is very important in providing access and in a timely manner, returning phone calls, that sort of stuff.
Okay, that makes sense. So I saw this question pop up already in the comments too. Obviously, we're in a crazy market right now. A lot of multiple offer situations. Do multiple offers have any weight in the appraisal process?
They certainly have weight in my process. And I can't always say what everyone else is looking at. The heart of the analysis of the appraisal to develop a value opinion, after you know the elements of the property and the features and all the other things that go into it, the heart of it is an analysis that relies on what is the principle of substitution. That no buyer would pay more for a property than he could find an equivalent substitute for less, or a buyer would buy the property that was best at the same price. And so when we get into a market like this where there's nothing else to buy, and multiple offers become more common and over list price becomes more common. So I like to think back, well, nothing's sold for this price, but you can't go buy anything for less. And so if I'm here thinking about probability, then I think it would sell for that. And I have appraised many properties in the last couple of years that were above list price, and they seem to be supported by the market. But the problem can come in if it's not handled properly from the appraisal standpoint, discussing these things. We're supposed to talk about the listing of the property and how it relates to everything else. Then people just push it aside, and they go on down the road. Most appraisers have not seen a market like this. We did have the 2014-15 period that was pretty strong. I started trying to think of a market where the prices were moving up at this 1% a month like we are right now. And I have to go all the way back to my beginning, which was the late 1970s, early 1980s, where at that time, before all the second guessing and scrutiny, it was very common in an appraisal report. If you look at the grid, you'll see the first item for adjustment is time. And then you go down to location and lot size and house size. And the appraiser's using a blended analysis where they're adjusting for every one of these factors. And then they get down to the bottom and they got an indicated value by that. So we used to put in, if the median price at that time was maybe $80,000, and let's say you had a $100,000 house, and you had a comparable that sold 6 months ago for 95,000, we would put a plus 6,000 on time as an adjustment because it sold in an inferior time period. And you start getting those pluses and you get up to where we are now. Credit officers and other lenders and everybody don't like lending on appreciation. So you have to really have backup for these sort of numbers. And there is a lot of backup now, but they may say, well, give me every price change in the neighborhood in the last 2 years or something. It just adds all this extra effort. And so to me, and we'll get into this on some of the questions on what can a realtor do to help. My office is near the Heights, or they call me the Greater Heights now. I thought it was more like, Lazy Brook or Oak Forest or something. But now I'm Greater Heights. And if the listing agent would have it, and they're claiming they had multiple offers, if they meet you at the property, which is nice, but not always possible, bring a folder with all your other offers printed out. Yeah. You don't have to give us copies of it. You can say, look, here's an offer I had for $1.2 million. Here's an offer I had for $1.250 million. Here's an offer I had for $1.225 million. And then when you go looking through the sales data with them, they'll say this pending sale is selling for more than list price. They have knowledge because it's their farm. They know what's going on. And if there's time that people can spend, and it may have to be done by email or something, but if there's something that the appraiser can put in their work file to show how they investigated this. One reason I talk about putting it into work file and so forth, there's still litigation against appraisers from 2005, 6, and 7. There is no statute of limitations. So there's a long reach if you can't support what you do.
Okay. And that actually was a question I had for you. Ashley actually asked, do you utilize the packages, contract, HCAD, comps, etc., that we prepare for you? So we'll let you answer that question, but it sounds like in a multiple offer situation, that package should also include some other offers.
Well, it should, or maybe you could have an email that kind of lays out that just so it's documented. Because when you just hear people say things, it's more like a hearsay thing. I heard this person say they had multiple offers, but if they give you the addresses, and you don't need to divulge anything that's confidential or so forth like that. And so at that point, yes, I utilize it. A lot of times they come in real nice folders from the usual, companies that have great stuff like that. I'm not necessarily going to utilize that big folder, but I'll pull everything out of it and recycle the folder. And so, but if an appraiser has the HAR matrix MLS, which they should if they're in Houston, or the area, a lot bigger than that now, they should have access to all the printouts and things like that.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. So what else, what can realtors do, or even sellers? What are some things that they can do to help with the appraisal process?
The data and so forth is important. I think that, sellers, it's probably just a matter of being accommodating. And then there's we've got one in here of pet peeves of what not to do, which might be a good talk back because we're talking about data, right?
Right.
Realtors, for good reasons and expediency, focus very much on price per square foot of house.
Mm-hmm.
It's selling for $250 a square foot. It's selling for $225. It's $280. This one's $500. This one's $200. All that sort of stuff. Appraisers do not produce an appraisal report emphasizing that at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so the appraiser is more interested in the indicators of value that are similar in terms of house size, lot size, age, features, things like that. And so if I'm appraising a $2 million house that's at X per square foot, and the agent gives me all these ones that were close to X per square foot, if I'm $2 million property and they're giving me ones that sold for $3 million or $4 million and ones that sold for 500,000 or $1 million, those aren't going to go in an appraisal report because they're too different.
Hmm.
And so if you can really focus on the most similar properties, then normally the price per foot, they kind of aggregate around houses of similar age, houses of similar land size. For appraisals in high land value areas, take West University Place. A brand new spec home in Westview, the land is 40% of the value.
Hmm.
A brand new spec home out in the suburbs, the land might be 5 or 10% of the value. So it becomes very important to have houses that are similar in that factor.
Okay.
And the other thing I would add, I think there's too much emphasis on holding everything to the last 6 months.
Hmm.
Somewhere in the training, at one time, that was a huge thing for the Fannie Mae's and so forth. They finally decided it's more important to have a house that's like the subject than it is to have one that's very dissimilar that sold a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
And now, if we got prices moving up, then the most recent sales ought to also be the highest sales, but don't avoid going beyond 6 months, particularly in higher value properties that are complex. I mean, we might use sales that are 2 or 3 years ago. We're talking about an $8-10 million home.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get into complex properties, then you normally have different appraisers too, hopefully.
Okay. This came in actually as a follow-up to your question, your comment earlier about including multiple offers in those packets. If the realtor didn't include the multiple offers at the time of the appraisal, can they submit it later to raise the appraisal?
If the appraisal's still in process, that's when to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Once the appraiser has finished their appraisal report and they've signed it and they've submitted it, then when the appeal comes in, you have this natural tendency where people now they got to explain why they were wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wrong because I didn't know about this sale over here that was non-disclosed or something that now I know about. And that can make a difference after the fact. But if you're going to provide good data or good, insight, do it as soon as possible in the process.
Okay.
Because after it's already turned in, a lot of times the appraiser has no ability to change the value unless they're requested by the client to look at it.
Okay. A few questions coming in about specific features. I saw this one more than once about solar panels. How do appraisers view solar panels?
All adjustments and all features, in theory, we're looking to what the market indicates.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can pair that property up with other properties that have solar panels, just like a pool and other properties that have pools, then we don't need to make another adjustment for that.
Mm-hmm.
If not, then we need to figure out, well, how much more do the houses with solar panels sell for than the ones without it? Houston doesn't have a whole lot of that. We probably will and more in the future, perhaps. But so we might look to what is the savings per year on electricity, and then maybe look at that on over a 5-year horizon and say, well, someone might pay X more to have these solar panels, and then there's also the people just want stuff like that. And I don't know if the sun's out and it's not snowing. I guess it might help during power failure. So at this point, it's kind of gaining ability, but the value of green amenities is sometimes hard to pull out of the marketplace. So there are a lot of things that make a house energy efficient as much as the the passive stuff. Which way the house faces, the best radiant barrier is a big tree, things like that, which have been around forever. And so it's hard to quantify. Let's just put it that way. That's kind of the way I talk around that question.
Okay. So we had somebody submit a question ahead of time that what are your pet peeves when it comes to dealing with realtors? But I don't know if it was supposed to be a joke, but I think it's a good opportunity for you to tell us some things that maybe realtors should not do prior to the appraisal or during.
Well, I think most people are pretty well informed now that the appraiser is supposed to be an independent third party without conflicts of interest, and to put undue pressure, to borderline threaten that if this doesn't work out, that I'm going to tell every other company never to use you, that sort of stuff. We don't see much of that anymore. I mean, being nice, being accommodating to view the property and things like that. I mean, that's very important. And so I think a lot of appraisers, especially the ones that have never done any brokerage or sales, really don't have a adequate respect for the realtors. And I think it kind of works two ways. And you see all sorts of realtors and you see all sorts of appraisers, but at least the markets I work in, I have a high regard for the people out there, the realtors. The appraisers vary a lot, and I have a high respect for the appraisers too. In talking about expediency, if you get down into the production type homes and homogeneous neighborhoods where everything's alike, I don't know how many people are aware, but there are a lot of appraisals now that are being done that are bifurcated. The firm has appraisers that have the credentials that have to have them, either a licensed appraiser or a state certified, can do things over $1 million and all. Most of them end up being state certified to have a broad appeal. And so they send somebody out to measure the house and maybe photograph it. All the appraiser really does is walk through the house, may spend 5 or 10 minutes. That goes back to the office or wherever. It is sent to India overnight, and there might be a group of 20, 40, 50 people in India who are very smart and very competent that essentially put the appraisal together with all the data that's available to them, like the appraiser. And then it goes back overnight to the appraiser, and they tweak it, and it goes out the door. And so, how does a realtor get involved in that when they don't even know who's really doing the appraisal? But anytime you can let people in and do the work, I mean, it's. I don't have a lot of complaints about what realtors do. It's nice to, I get along with dogs fine, but it's nice to not have a little dog that bites you in the back of the heel or something. And I'm sure they feel the same way.
We have a few questions coming in about appealing appraisals. Is there a process to appeal appraisals? Also, there were comments that, many realtors believe appraisers can do whatever they want, but is there some sort of regulation? Is there a place to report an appraiser? Those kinds of questions. We're getting a lot of those coming in. So if you could speak to that.
The appraisers, starting back in the 1990s, appraisers were licensed, which the state certification is a part of being licensed. And under the U.S. Congress, there was created the Appraisal Foundation, and I may not get all these parts right, but yes, appraisers are highly regulated. There's the Uniform Standard of Professional Appraisal Practices is a thick book of regulations and opinions and so forth, where every single line in the book is numbered. And the number one obligation of an appraiser doing mortgage lending work or lending work is to comply with the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. So you can Google that. They normally come out with a new edition every 2 or 3 years. We all have to go to class on it. And that really lays out what is required in an appraisal to be worthy, to be credible, worthy of belief. And so it's very structured as far as what we can do. And there are all sorts of little parts and pieces that go beyond that, just due to Fannie Mae regulations. Another major rule or regulation came out of some of the financial crises is a FIRERA, which is a Federal Institutional Recovery and Reform Act, and so forth and so on. So they're highly regulated. We're under the Texas Appraisal Licensing and Certification Board, which is kind of in there with TREC. If somebody wants to make a complaint, you can go to their site, and there's a form where you can file a complaint. It obligates the person complaining to really lay out what they know. It's not just a matter, I think he was low, but if you have things that were not done properly, then you file a complaint. There are a lot of them filed every year, and they investigate them. And the last thing an appraiser wants is to get under investigation.
Sure, of course. This has been brought up a few times in a few different ways. If we could discuss appraisers using comps that are nothing like the property they're appraising or in a different subdivision. Now, in the reverse, we actually had some members asking, can we select comps from a different subdivision? So we have two different mindsets on that, but if you could maybe speak to your thoughts on that, whether it be the realtor using it for their comps or an appraiser using it.
The appraiser ought to pick the best comps. Now, what makes the best comps are the ones that are most indicative of value, which hopefully they're recent and they're in the same market area. I think there's too much emphasis on immediate subdivision. If you think of it like a home buyer out there in a normal market, this is a little frenzied. But if they would shop for the comparable as well as they would shop for the property under appraisal, then that's in the same market area. HAR's done a good job of creating the geo market areas. I think if you pull them out of there, some of them are huge, some of them are very small. That's one place to start, but that doesn't necessarily just follow subdivisions. So a lot of time, there's a lot that goes on picking comps. Sometimes an appraiser already just went there. They have these other ones ready to go. They put them in and they go. They don't look for anything else. This is back to, part of complying with fast and cheap. And so I could go on forever about how to pick the right sales, but, it's the ones, if you're in Friendswood and you use sales out of the Memorial Villages, that's pretty obvious that's kind of out of whack. And that happens on some of the appeals for this flood stuff. People were getting appraisals like that. So the kind of the rough guidelines, a lot of lenders want more explanation for is if the property is more than a mile away. Well, you be in the Memorial area and be more than a mile away and be in the same neighborhood almost, and you can be in the Woodlands and the same thing. And so that's part of picking the right property. I mean, picking the right comparables is the most important thing. It's actually more important than how to adjust them and analyze them, but picking the right ones that are good matches. I mean, if you have a 10-year-old house that's dated and you want to give the appraiser all brand new home sales, I think people would probably pay more for a brand new home. So you have to adjust for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. There was actually a question similar to this about homes in the country. Becky said it's hard to get comps on homes in the country. How do you appraise these homes? How much does the direct area or surroundings affect the appraisal?
I agree, it can be hard. I tell you, it's a lot easier than it used to be because HAR has created a platform where it used to be if you went to Washington County, you had to stop in at this office and stop in at that office and see what you could find. We used to do quite a bit of it. I have pretty much stopped doing it because I'm not out there a lot. Mm-hmm. Also, technically, if an appraiser is certified to do residential property, when you get into acreage, you really need an appraiser who's generally or certified general. Even though they may not know as much about the houses, they have the credentials. And you can run into a problem getting a state certified residential appraiser to go out to an unrestricted area and do a property on acreage. And then there's other things that, so yes, you go further. I mean, you're going to be 5, 10 miles away, maybe 20 miles away. Hopefully you're in the same county. Maybe the same school district. You got all sorts of issues as far as access, utilities. There's just a lot of things that are different than doing an appraisal in Cinco Ranch or something.
Sure.
Even though that's complicated after the flood.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. So a few other questions that came in. What is a good resource for realtors to use when they're looking for maybe values for different features? Sorry, I was trying to find the question. There it is again. Pauline said, what is a good resource for a realtor to use to estimate what certain features can be valued at by an appraiser, like pools, upgrades, features within the home, etc.?
There is no real, I mean, most of the things I've seen in the magazines and other places tend to be, they talk to people and they ask them how much do they think it adds, or they talk to an appraiser and how much do you think it adds. Mm-hmm. Upgrades are a kind of a different issue from a standpoint of are you changing the house and lowering its effective age, or you just putting in some feature you always wanted, like a home theater system that in 2 years is going to be obsolete. Swimming pools tend to go up in their contribution to value as the price range goes up. A lot different, we talked about this earlier, a lot different to have a $50,000 pool on a $100,000 house than it is on a $1 million property. Mm-hmm. And so what the appraiser tries to do is look to the market to tell us how much those have. And of course, that's not always possible, but if you can, say you have a home that has a detached quarters, room over the garage or something for the nanny or the college kid or something. Mm-hmm. If you can find other homes that sold that have that same feature, then it should be built into whatever they sold for. And then the homes that don't have that feature, adjust for everything else, age, size, condition, time, whatever. And how much difference is that price? How much, I mean, it's not, I've had assignments in River Oaks where people were spending $300,000 on their room over the garage. And I don't see that the market adds $300,000 for a room over the garage. But so the cost becomes detached from the contribution to value.
Okay. What about major maintenance, like new roof, exterior paint, all stucco, water heaters, etc.?
Well, that's part of the condition of the property. And in this day and time, the appraisal reports are all drafted with a uniform data set, which
Mm-hmm.
I guess MLS will get to someday. And so they rate the condition of the property: C1, C2, C3, C4, C3, 5, whatever. Quality, Q1, quality, it's all done. This helps all the data mining and so forth. And so if you can elevate the condition some, if you can elevate the quality some,
Mm-hmm.
then there may be, you pick a comp that's more like that, or you adjust for the difference. And there are many things that it's really helps the marketability of a house, but it's difficult to quantify. And that leads me to talk for a second about, in all the second guessing of appraisals and the move towards the algorithms and the computerization, there is a real discouragement of any subjective
Mm-hmm.
um, adjustment. They need to be quantitative, not qualitative. Years ago, there was a great line on the appraisal grid that was design and appeal. I think it probably is the biggest difference in a lot of houses, is how what the floor plan's like, is it with it, all that as far as the condition and things. But that's a qualitative adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
And so that a lot of that comes in how the appraiser rates the property in terms of its condition and quality and so forth like that. I mean, there's a whole host of those things. If you have people run multiple linear regression models on this stuff, you really need at least 30 other properties to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that's what the CoreLogic estimate is in the MLS tax report now. And if you watch those estimates, they can be right on the money, or they can be double or half what the property value is. So there's still a lot to do with those to get them better.
Okay. Now, kind of this, we feel like we led up to this question. How do appraisers value total renovations of old homes?
Well, total, like the neighborhood I grew up in, Memorial, they took my parents' house down to the slab
Hmm.
and left a couple frame walls, took the brick off and expanded it, and then made it new inside and then put the brick back on. It's not totally new, but it's very much like new. And I think that again, it's back to what, if you can match it up with other homes, there might be appraisers that say, I will not compare this to a new house.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would. I might have to adjust for the little difference in not new or not. And under our uniform data, we can never call a house new if it's got the original foundation.
Yeah.
And there's a nice high-rise condominium, the River Oaks, that the building was built back in the 50s or 60s, and they took it down to the concrete frame over next to St. John's and St. Luke's, and then everything was built back. But we can't say that's a new building under our guidelines. But I compare it to new buildings.
Okay. All right. This question has come in a lot, and that is about why FHA and VA appraisals come in so much lower.
I have done hundreds, or if not thousands, of appraisals for the VA and FHA, none in the last 5 or 10 years. And I know people still handling them. There may be a little different as far as how they approach things. I didn't know there was really that much problem with them. I think that particularly with the VA where there's nothing down, then the difference of even $500 might kill the deal or something.
Mm-hmm.
The VA has a panel of appraisers they use that they are in a rotation and they go out and they're reviewed. And I'm not sure it's any different than it is with conventional mortgages, really.
Yeah.
FHA has their certain guidelines that they want to have. It may be related to the condition of the property, or there was a time where they preferred you to use comparables of a certain type and things like that. They tend to be more concerned. I mean, there's also, particularly in FHA, VA, there's a lot of contribution to the buyer's cost that maybe the house is sold for 200, but the buyer really needs some closing costs, so they raise the price to 206 by paying 3% contribution of value. It's pretty obvious that they just put it on top of the price. And so it's really a matter if there's enough in the market to kind of go ahead and take care of that or not. So sometimes that's the problem, is that they're adding to the price just based upon something that's not going to change the proceeds to the deal. So sometimes those have a problem. And that's a pet peeve of mine too, I think of, is when I've had a buyer's agent give me an amendment to the contract saying this was going to happen and they were changing the price just to see if it would appraise okay. But the listing agent and the seller had no idea that there was this amendment out there. That's the
Okay. This question has come in quite a bit as well, and it's about flood. Does the appraisal look into how many times a home was flooded? Also, there's a question, can you compare previously flooded to homes that did not flood? How does that affect the appraisal?
It's a very complex question. I know we've dealt with it seriously and many times with HAR MLS advisory group. Flooding is an issue that is the history of the property. It's not the property as you see it now.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a whole industry called title companies that are set up to understand if the people selling the property own the property or not.
Mm-hmm.
With flooding, we're really relying on the seller to disclose what they know. And of course, flooding is under the site and then it's into the structure. There's several stages of it. The seller's disclosure has gotten more detailed on that. The question is, yes, you can compare a house to anything you want to, so to speak, but you better know what the impact of the flooding was on it. And people that say it was a one-time event, I've lived in a neighborhood out Memorial that 6 feet above any flood hazard zone, got 2 feet of water in it. Everybody says it'll never happen again. I mean, if it happened then, I don't know why it couldn't happen again. There's a lot of effort to change that. As long as people can get insurance, that's a major factor. You do have issues with older homes that in doing major renovations, they may require you to elevate the home. And it's a really tricky thing from the standpoint of which neighborhoods are affected and which neighborhoods aren't, and how much. There's been a lot of analysis done on it. There's a lot of valuation work going on the flood houses now in different areas for different purposes. And I think the real loss is in the land value in the beginning. But a new house may not be impacted by the flood, so to speak, because it's built above it. And so that it's really a case-by-case basis, but just like a buyer or seller needs to have a geographically competent agent, the appraiser needs to be geographically competent. If they have no idea that an area flooded or when it flooded or how much or how often, it's something they need to find out if they're going to do appraisal work there. And the same thing with a buyer's agent going into a neighborhood. There's just no comprehensive place you can look it up. I mean, even the flood insurance people don't really know where it floods.
Yeah.
I could go on for hours about flooding.
Yeah. I know we're way over time, but we have so many questions coming in, so much good information that you're sharing. I am seeing some repeat questions, so that might mean that you tuned in a little after we started. So just remember, as soon as we wrap up here, you can rewatch this from the beginning if you missed any of the information that Jeff shared at the beginning. I want to ask a few more questions though before we let you go. There was a question about comparing different builder companies. So would builder companies affect appraisal of a house? Example, D.R. Horton versus Perry. Same with subdivision. So would you compare? Does that matter?
Yes, I mean, I would compare them. I mean, if they're in the same price range and everything, I think that's another question that the answer is it's what the market indicates. If a person's going to shop for a Perry home and shop for a D.R. Horton home, that means they're really looking to see which one they consider the best value. And so at one time, it may still be that way. There were guidelines that said Fannie Mae had them where you had to use a comparable by another builder. You couldn't use all comparables by the same builder. And the same thing with condominiums. It's kind of that way too, particularly new condominiums. And so the pricing is, different builders have different pricing power depending upon their inventory and other factors. It may be a good point. I've got all day. I know people don't, but new homes are a little bit different from an appraisal point, and there are problems from a standpoint of a new home that is bought to be built, even a higher end home. And that is that the appraisals are done as of the effective date of the appraisal. If you have an existing home, then it's been on the market and now it's selling. So that's exposure time. With a proposed home, the appraisal is done under the hypothetical condition that it's completed according to plans and specifications and so forth. But it's still as of today. And we saw this in the financial crisis where builders began to go, and I'm thinking more the higher end, it could have been anywhere though. The builders began to pay more and more for their land. They go from $200,000 a lot to $300,000 or $400,000. Well, they just paid $100,000 more for their lot than the guy who bought the lot that just sold the house that's the good comp right now. And so the value, they're speculating that on a spec house, no pun intended or redundant there, but that the house, by the time they get out there 6, 8 months, a year down the road, that the prices will be there. And we also have the compounding thing of high lumber costs and so forth now. If the music stops, those houses don't sell. And if you remember, if you were around during 2008, 9, 2010, there were a lot of houses that had been built thinking the market was going to go where the costs were, and they didn't. If the market keeps going, and it's true with house flippers, if the market's going up, then they get that kind of wave as it goes. If the music stops, all speculation is a lot less predictable than a house that's being bought to live in by somebody. There are a lot of ins and outs of houses, upgrades on houses. I tend to look at the base price, what the final price was, and the difference is the upgrades. Because if you look at a new home contract, which could be at 500 pages long at font 6, they got all these upgrades, $1,000 here, $500 here, $10,000 here. Oh, it's December discount of 5%. Now we're going to add this much over here. Now it's a second time you bought a house from this discount here, and you get to the end and they say, well, I just saw this in a $3 million high-rise condo unit. They said it has $300,000 in upgrades. I got a really long contract, and honest people and everything, and it did have $300,000 in upgrade, but there was a $100,000 discount when you did the $300,000 in upgrade. So what was the actual cost? It wasn't $300,000, but so I mean it's kind of like new cars almost.
Yeah. Quick question here about depreciation. Is there a depreciation factor for property with a repaired foundation, mold remediation, etc.?
I think it's we're thinking more in terms of a discount. I think a depreciation more and a cost approach to the value. And again, there's a lot of litigation where these things are looked at very carefully by different appraisers. and they have the time to go out and find all the houses that sold with mold, or find all the houses that had foundation repair, and then you really pull out the impact from those things. That's the market angle on it. The cost is another angle on it. And then whether you get into a stigmatized situation. I know people have gone down to the appraisal district and said, I got a crack foundation. Well, then they put in the tax things, bad, poor foundation. When you go to sell your house 10 years later, well, it really wasn't that bad. And mold, if you don't have water, you don't have mold, but we've got a lot of water with some bad designs on air conditioning systems, all the sealed up houses with all the different methods, and they're out there being litigated right now. So I think from the agent standpoint, you just want to be sure if you're on either side and you have a material fact about a house that you disclose it. Even if it's not on a seller's disclosure notice, I believe the broker has an obligation to disclose it, because there's nothing worse than somebody finding out after it. Then it becomes much harder to deal with.
Okay. There was a question about calculating for a larger lot. Is there a way a realtor can use some sort of formula to adjust for a significantly larger lot? Most lots in this particular area are about 8,000 square feet. What if you have a cul-de-sac lot that's 12,000 square feet? So is there a formula or a way that realtors can calculate that value?
This goes back to appraisers using a blended analysis, where we start with the sales price of the comparable, and then we make adjustments to the comparable to get an indication of value of the subject. We don't adjust the subject, we just describe it as we find it. And so, just like when you get the price per square foot of house, if the house is selling for $200 a square foot, if you made a $200 a square foot adjustment for every square foot difference, you haven't thought about the land and the garages and the site improvements and all these things. So it tends to be a marginal adjustment. It may be half that, or even a third that. If you look at what appraisers use for a factor for house size, and there's debate among appraisers on how to handle it. If you're in a neighborhood, say West University, an 8,000 square foot lot might be $140 a square foot. So we're talking $1 million or something. And the 12,000 square foot lot may be just as much per foot because bigger lots are scarce. So you got to figure out the marginal adjustment. Some people say, well, if this lot were vacant, it would sell for that, and this lot were vacant, it would sell for that, and whatever the difference is. But I'm of the school that it's more under the current utilization and the fact that it's a marginal thing. And so I hate to just give away rules of thumbs and things like that, but I might think in terms of, if it's half land value to begin with, well, maybe we'll use half. Instead of using $140 a square foot, we'll use $60 or $70 a square foot.
Okay.
One item that this is a good point to mention, if you're in the city of Houston, they have started new regulations. Any lot over 15,000 square feet, you have to retain the stormwater on your site. And I just finished a proposed home in Tanglewood, a custom home, 20,000 foot lot. They were spending $80,000 to dig big holes in the front yard and put underground tanks there. All the water from the house goes into the tanks, and when it fills up and the rain's over with, then the electric pumps pump it out and send it off. That's a weird impact. The bigger the lot, really, you may prefer to have one a couple feet smaller that isn't under that rule. And I hope they can do something about that.
Yeah.
The drainage plans in Houston have just gotten crazy. You can back up to a creek and they say you got to drain the water to the street, even though forever it's gone to the back. So
yeah.
But the adjustment is a marginal adjustment, and I think it's if you got a newer home on there, it's a lot different than if you're dealing with a bunch of homes that are tear downs. You know, in West
Sure.
University, houses from the 80s and 90s are being torn down all the time.
Okay, wonderful. Jeff, you have shared so much great information today. One of our members said appraisals are just as complex as I thought. Stephen just made a comment earlier. He said, if you talk openly and gingerly with your appraiser, they will work for you. And I would venture to guess that you agree with that
Being
sentiment.
nice is right.
Yeah. Very good. Well, again, Jeff, thank you so much for your time today. Our members are thanking you in the comments. We really appreciate it. You've helped us make a little more sense of it, and hopefully our members can take this information into their transactions. But I do want to let everyone know that next week we will be getting a legal update, actually, from Katie Johnson with NAR and our legal counsel, HR legal counsel, Grant Harpold. So lots of legal stuff that we're going to be discussing. A lot of lawsuits going on right now, so they're going to help shed some light on that for us. Jeff, again, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
All right. Well, that's it for this Member Focus Monday. We hope you all have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.